eliminating jargon and saying things the way things really are usually typically shows who we are as human beings. And we kind of show those imperfections.
Hi, I'm Chris Reynolds, and I'm on a mission to help independent financial advisors build a better business through a remarkable client experience. In this podcast, you're going to learn how to do that from my conversations with the visionaries, the leaders, the independent advisors who are reshaping the future of the financial advice industry. At the end of each episode, you're going to walk away with an actionable idea that you can take and use right now, and it will help you to build a better business today. This is Turning the Page. Well, we all agree that it's a busy world. And in the old days, the saying was that people vote with their wallet. But nowadays, people vote with their time. What's the advice that you would give to people to pay attention to your message? What do you need to really make your message stand out? And I read a very interesting book. And their advice was cut the jargon, build purpose, get real, which I totally, as soon as I read it, I'm like, this is my kind of guy. People today are just inundated with, nonstop content. I am, and I've admitted on the show more than once that as a grown man, I spend far too much time on TikTok. And I think this has led to the attention span deficit that we all have as a society. And quite honestly, people don't know where to look. They don't know who to trust. And the question that every entrepreneur asks is, how do you win their time? How do you win your client's confidence? And these questions were all asked in a fantastic book. And I was just saying, I just finished it, and it's from, renowned advertising creative director, Ron Tite. I loved his powerful approach to cutting through the noise. His book has 3 words: think, do, say. Ditch the jargon and start making good things happen for you and your organization. I don't think there's anything clearer about this than think, do, say. So today, Ron, I have you aboard. I'll give you a little introduction, and then I'll let you tell your story. He's the best-selling author. He's a speaker, producer, entrepreneur. He blurs the line between art and commerce, which is something that I certainly admire. He's an award-winning advertising writer. He's a creative director. He's worked for some huge brands, from Air France to Fidelity to Johnson & Johnson, Microsoft. He's also, as an entrepreneur, founder of Church+State. Love the name, by the way. He's the host of his own podcast, the Coup, which hopefully everyone will listen to. And, is publisher of This Is That Travel Guide to Canada. I haven't read that one yet, but it is a bestseller and award-winning. He's a comedian. I could just keep going down the list here, but welcome aboard, Ron. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. And thanks to everybody out there who's listening. That's my radio voice, right? We all need a radio voice. I feel like I should say something like, you're listening to The Storm here on Chris FM.
You got to decide which radio voice you're going to use, either the smooth jazz radio voice or the rock and roll or the Dr. Johnny Fever radio voice. I go for the Johnny Fever one, personal hero of mine, but maybe the smooth jazz one. You do the smooth jazz one and I'll do the Johnny Fever.
All the 20-year-olds are going like, who's Johnny Fever? What?
I did bring that up one time and people were like, I don't know who that is. So Ron, again, welcome aboard. So how about you tell your story? How did you get here? What journey brought you here?
Well, I just walked down the stairs to my basement. It's right in the house. It's amazing.
And here you are.
And here I am. Well, it's a kind of a non-traditional path, I guess. It's a weird thing when everything is kind of coming together. But, I, like most people, like most of your guests, probably, I did a phys ed degree.
Of course, who doesn't?
As one does. And but this was the beginning of, I graduated so I'm 52. And so if you do the math on it, you'll realize I emerged into the workplace just as the internet was kind of starting to take off. And so my very first job was not in phys ed, but it was actually in the business school at Queen's University.
Oh, okay.
And so I helped launch the first national executive MBA program through video conferencing. And that was this weird I just remember going to the director going, why you want me in the, I'm a phys ed guy. And he said, look, you know what? You are competitive, you are social, you're smart, and you're a great team player. All those things that you kind of learned in the phys ed world.
Right.
That means you're great for business. So the other stuff is not rocket science. So I went to the Queen's Business School, helped launch that, was the kind of the beginning of the internet. So I started having this kind of tech, perspective on stuff. Then started working in advertising with, as an account guy running the Intel business and in tech accounts, Microsoft. And then simultaneously had this weird launched myself into comedy. Was trained at the Second City, started doing stand-up.
Right, which I found fascinating. I thought that was such a great thing to as a background to get into the business you're in.
Yeah, it was just weird. And then all these worlds started coming together where I wanted my advertising world and my comedy world to come closer together. So I moved into the creative department, started as a writer and then creative director. And then at some point, the comedy started into like speaking, where I kind of got into that world. And then a very specific pivot where I thought when I'd go and deliver as a comedian, I'd give insights about business, and people go, what the hell does this guy know about business? Like this is a comedian. And so I went to my agent and I said, you know what, that we need a very strong shift here. There's no market for a comedian who knows about business, but there's a huge market for a funny business guy.
That's true.
So
very
pull
true.
comedian from my bio. I don't want to, pull it. And then moved into speaking. And then at that time was like, executive creative director at Havas, a multinational agency. And then again, as the internet kind of to grow and digital and social and everything started fundamentally changing that world, and decided to leave and start my own thing so I could just control my destiny a little bit easier and could deliver things that was more in line with what it's one or the other, but I thought that there was an interesting path that one could take, and I wanted to define what that was.
I love it. And I love it that path led here, and it led you to writing the book, Think, Do, Say. And as I said, I just finished it, on a recommendation of actually my producer. And, one of the big premises that and it's all common sense, I think, but people are literally inundated with content. Like, you can't go anywhere. You can't turn on your computer, can't turn on your phone, can't drive down the road. You can't walk down the road without being inundated by somebody trying to get their message across. So your book really does a good job at this, but maybe you can expand on it. How do you stand out from the noise? So the entrepreneurial people who are listening to this podcast, they should be asking themselves this question all the time. How do you stand out from everyone who has a very similar message?
Yeah, it's a challenge that everybody faces, whether you're, in finance, whether you're an academic at a traditional university, whether you're in healthcare, it doesn't matter. It's nonstop. And it's kind of, the metaphor that makes it, I think, that crystallizes it. It's kind of like the average Canadian consumer is in the middle of Times Square, metaphorical Times Square, right? And it's you're just surrounded by these signs, and the entire ecosystem has been built for those eyes. There's 400,000 people traipse through Times Square every single day. The entire ecosystem is designed to appeal to eyeballs. But when you're in the middle of it, you have no idea where to look. You have no clue where to look. And, for entrepreneurs out there, like the trick with that metaphor is that, and that's just the top layer of Times Square. Down below, this is where kind of what I would call insurgent forces are, people on the street. And they're a little more aggressive and more tactical, and they can be more customized. And that's the metaphor is like, well, this is where startups are, right? They don't have the legacy to be up top. They don't have the polish of being up top, but they could be way more nimble. So the trick is that, people, they stand there and they don't know where to look and they don't know who to trust. And so the idea of standing out is something that, people have been saying that phrase for a while. And I think it's like, it shouldn't be about standing out. It should be about building a long-term sustainable business. That's what it should be about. Now, so how does one separate themselves so that they can start to grow that business and they can start to build their book of business and whatnot? Well, that is knowing that it's not just about standing out, because if you wanted to just stand out, well, go naked.
Right.
You know, like
There are ways. Yeah.
there are ways, right? So, and they go, well, I'm not going to do that. Like, oh, okay. So you don't just want to stand out. You want to stand out and build trust for the long term.
Right.
And so it's not playing the short game, it's playing the long game and building trust on a continual basis over time. And that is really, to do that is aligning what you think, what you do, and what you say.
What you say. Yeah, it really comes together. And as you put it in the book, it's all about being authentic, authentic self, authentic with content, authentic, and it comes with what you think, as you said, what you do and what you say. So maybe take us through that, what you think, what you do, what you say. How does that lead to authenticity?
Sure. So the think side is that everything you do needs to be grounded in something. It needs to be grounded in some sort of fundamental belief that you have about the business that you're in. And we've seen this massive shift from a corporate purpose standpoint, and but that means many things to many people. And we have the joke inside the agency, which is like, what's the purpose of purpose? Like the purpose of purpose, what's the purpose of purpose? Because a lot of people think it's just like, oh, you're talking about saving the environment and diversity and inclusion. And you're like, no, that's not purpose. Like those things are all very important, obviously.
And great,
That's not purpose. So we've seen the end of the shareholder value era. That's what we've seen. We've seen people like Jack Welch, may he rest in peace. We've seen that, Dave Glass's great book of, The Man Who Broke Capitalism. Like we see that if you focus on shareholder value, you won't deliver shareholder value, that you need to focus on other things and have shareholder value be a benefit of that. So you need to believe in something that goes beyond what you sell, but that is linked to what you sell. But so now, okay, we share values. So you have a fundamental belief. You're not just here for the sell. Okay. So I got that belief.
Got it.
Secondly, the reason you do that is to focus your activities. And there are so many people who've been like, they're just running around with like a chicken with their head cut off. They're just randomly doing stuff. As my friend Warren says, random acts of digital, just like, they're just doing stuff. And it's not tying back to any purpose. It's not reinforcing any purpose. And I don't know how you evaluate them. So you need to do stuff that reinforce the purpose. And it also, when you trust is built around your actions, not about your words and the things on your wall. It is like your personal reputation is built in how you act. And, I shouldn't read your values. I should experience your values.
Exactly.
The do is really important. And then once you believe in something more and you align your behaviors to reinforce that, it's worth talking about. Like it's worth talking about. But talk about it in a compelling way, and talk about it in an interesting way, and talk about it in a way that appeals. In finance, there's just a sea of institutions and companies and advisors that all sound the same.
Oh yeah.
And so if you have a really unique brand belief and really unique products or approaches, shouldn't your communications be unique too? Shouldn't you be able to deliver on that? And growth comes from, if you're growing your book of business, growth comes from other people adopting your ideas, and they adopt your ideas depending on how you communicate them.
Yep. No, and I've seen other material on this where, there's one brand, it's not the logo, and it really plays into everything you've just been saying. It's not to do with what you put on your letterhead or your brochure. You have to feel it. That's the do part. And I think that's where, certainly struck home for me. And as somebody who's had, same business for 30 years.
Yeah.
Certainly when you start it, everybody has it and everyone's bright-eyed and all around the mission, and we're going to do this. And sometimes you sort of corporatize, if that's a word, where
it is now.
Everybody starts to look the same, and you keep looking outside for your inspiration. And then at some point you realize that that's all wrong. You got to go back to the doing part. You got to actually think it, do it, and then say it and get it. So there comes a time, I think, and you've probably seen this, where people are saying it, but they're not really doing it either.
Yeah.
So it's those three things in balance. I think you put it in really good perspective. Do you have any really good examples for the audience so that they can sort of align to this, so they can say, yeah, I've seen that in real life?
Yeah, there's a great case study that I came out just last summer, and General Motors, as old school as one can get,
Right.
and fresh on the heels of coming from going to the White House in their own private plane, begging for money.
Give me money, please.
Right. And so let's take a look at their market. Man, okay, the rise of EVs, that's one thing. The rise of ride sharing, the rise of completely of ride sharing, of Ubers, of brand new rental models, like everything around cars completely changing. The delivery of service with apps and mobile chatbots and everything else. The fundamental shift to dealerships and those models. And GM was left going with this old model. And so GM said, okay, we're going to take a fresh look at the business. So what did they do? The first thing they did was they looked at the purpose. Let's refresh this purpose. And again, tied to what they sell, but goes beyond what they sell.
Right.
And so the new purpose from General Motors that came out just last summer was together we will drive the world forward. And so that it's a little punny with the driving the world forward, but driving the world forward means so much more than cars, but that we will drive forward around diversity and inclusion. We will drive the world forward. We will progress as an organization. And yes, cars are a part of that, but there's so many other things. So that's what they thought. So what did they do? Well, they applied that thinking, not just to their EV portfolio. There's now have 14 different vehicles that are electric, but they applied it to their HR systems, that they're going to progress and drive the world forward from an HR standpoint. They're going to drive the world forward to have diverse teams that represent the communities in which they operate. They're going to drive the world forward to use their scale for good and to drive changes in communities with their scale. So that's what they did about it. And then the say part is, what do you believe and what do you do and how can you best communicate that? Well, they had this old one. They started out with the name and the logo, right? So it starts there. So it was that old capital G, capital M, and that old school blue. You can just smell the carburetor on it, And so what did they do? They made it more contemporary. They went to a lowercase g, a lowercase m, a more contemporary blue. And if you look closely in the M, in the negative space of the M, there's an electric plug in there. And so they did that. And then in terms of what the campaign was, if the internal line was we're bound together to drive the world forward, the external line, the campaign was simply everybody in. And everybody in is such a great way to communicate that. So they thought it, then they did it, then they said, how do we say it in the best way? And they said it. So it's really early on in that. I know that's a huge shift to turn around, but I love where they're going with it.
Yeah, and it is a good example because, to your point, it hits every one of the things they do. Now you're a creative guy, right? So you've been in comedy, you've done writing, you have an agency. Now, I don't know if you've ever met a lot of people in the wealth management business, but I'm not sure creative is the first thing that always pops into everyone's head. I know that they want to be creative. What are some tips about being like as a creative person?
Yeah.
What are some tips that you'd give to somebody to be more creative? How do they sort of let go from the little tiny framework that they view the world and be more creative to actually make what you're talking about actually come alive? How would you go about that process?
Well, there's a couple things. One is that there's this weird belief that creative people are born, and if you go to somebody like, well, you should be, it's kind of like saying, well, you should be funny. And they're like, oh, I'm not funny at all. I can't do that. But there's this guy at the opposite. He's a hoot. And I would, and people, clients and one will say like, oh, we don't know how you guys come up with these campaign ideas. And I think there's this fundamental belief that, oh, it just comes out of your fingers, right? Like you just write those lines and the taglines and the campaign ideas, and it just happens to those people who are creative. And the reality is, no. Like you don't want to, if you think this is a great headline, there's 400 others before it that suck or not creative.
Right.
So that's the first thing, is the fundamental belief that creativity, while there are admittedly some people who are more talented and natural to it, it is a job, and it is something that you can consciously work at getting better. And if you have the confidence that you just need to work through the crappy stuff to get to the good stuff. So that's one. Secondly, there are some things that you can do if it doesn't come naturally. One is there's an old improv game called Third Choice. And third choice is somebody is on a stage and they go, this is my son, and his name is, Frank. His name's Frank, and then someone can yell out second choice, and you go, his name is Fred. And third choice, his name's Barbara. Well, that's a more interesting and unique choice,
right,
for that name. And so what it does is, by applying third choice to everything we do, it does a couple of things. One, if you say, what should I put in the subject for this email?
Right.
Okay, let's create a subject for an email. You're going to go, here's the minutes from the meeting. Okay, that's your first choice. Identify it and admit that that's your first choice. Now force yourself. What's your second choice? Oh, my second choice is, here's the minutes. Great. What's your third choice? And the second you get into that third choice, this is when stuff starts to get real, because now you get that little feeling in your belly. You're like, well, I don't know. You get short of breath and you start panicking. You think, I got to come up with something fun. And so you just continually drive in that third choice, and you blurt out something. You're like, I don't know. It's the giraffes. Sure. So know that you can justify anything.
Right.
You can justify any choice. So you can say, the giraffe spots, and people go, what is this about?
Yeah.
And then your first line of the email would be like, sometimes I got to stick my neck out and do, like, you know what I mean? Like, you can just whatever. So you can have anything make sense by justifying it and by paying it off. But I find that for those who doesn't come naturally, identify what your first choice is, what's your second choice, and what's your third choice.
I love that technique. That's really, really good.
The other thing you can do is, if you have a certain topic, and let's say we go back to this minutes from the meeting topic, and it's what I call a 360 degree, which is like, let's identify the thing, the meeting. Okay. Tell me everything that happened in the meeting. Like, let's go around the circle. Like, it started late. Okay. That's one thing. Frank wore a Bermuda shirt. Great. That's another thing. There was an argument, there was a heated debate, or there was an emotional thing. Somebody cried. Now you've got all these other things to kind of write off of.
Right.
And, if you think Frank's Bermuda shirt was loud, ... here are the great minutes from the mail, or whatever. Like, so now you're giving yourself options to play off of.
I like it.
And so those are two quick techniques.
Yeah, but no, and as I said, it's a famous for our business that, the creativity, we tend to be creative by stealing what everyone else is doing, and that's not really creative per se. The other thing that and you may have observed this as well, is people just don't take the time to be creative. It's way easier just to stick with what you've always done, and it may progress, you may add to it, but it's not really creative. It's just more of the same. So I think sometimes it's just taking that and having time that you set aside each week to be a little bit more creative as an entrepreneur.
There's a great point. One way that you can think of it too is that we have an expression in our business, and it is kill it and bill it. It's like, get it done, get it out, right?
Right.
So you got to get really, really efficient. There was the original Tom Peters, or, the HP way of like management by walking around, and that's become management by reply all.
Right.
That people are spending way too much time on low calorie activities. And then when you go, hey, it takes a little bit more time to be creative, they go, I don't have more time. My day's already full. It's like, no, but you just wrote, War and Peace as an email to your team.
And yet
you're saying you have no time. It's because you're not making there are certain things that aren't on an assembly line that you're doing that should be done as efficiently as possible to save time, to save budget, to save energy, to do some interesting things.
Right. To do the cool stuff.
Yeah.
The other thing is that we see, of course, in our business, and probably it's not our business, all business, right? And you really touch on this in the book, jargon. We love jargon. We love it to death. And we think everybody's jiving with us as we use all of these big $3 words in all of our advertising and making things complicated. Tell us all about how you cut that jargon so you can get right to the message, because I know there's a whole chapter that I thought was fascinating around this.
Well, the jargon thing is, the why jargon exists in a lot of cases is for two reasons. One is to try and give you credibility. So you go, oh, if I don't talk with the jargon, they're not going to think I know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to act like I know all the jargon. The second thing is it protects, especially in an advisor type relationship, right? Is it protects that relationship to go like, oh, you don't know all the terms. That's why I'm here.
Exactly.
I'm here to
Good thing
translate.
I'm here.
Yeah. And so it protects the establishment, right? It goes, we're all going to use this together and only we know the meanings of these things. So therefore, you're going to continually come back to us. And often when you see what I call insurgent forces into established categories and established roles, how do they take the establishment out? They start by talking the way people really talk. Right. You see this in politics. You see this in business. People go, you know what? Who has done well in politics over the past, 25 years? The people who voters go, I want to have a beer with that guy. I want to have a beer with that person. Right. Because they talk like I talk. And right or wrong, we know that's, they've eliminated jargon. So I think it's absolutely paramount. The other thing is that the jargon can be, people are suffering from something we call infobesity, which they have so much information at their fingertips. Right. They can find out the meaning to your jargon. They can find out what that is. And some people are far more prepared. And if they're prepared and you just come at them with the jargon, they kind of think like, this is like, I'm not buying this script. Right. I've read this script before. I know this person doesn't really have because they're telling me the exact same thing they told the last family that was in here. Right. And we need to be able to customize for the individual. And so eliminating jargon and saying things the way things really are typically shows who we are as human beings. And we kind of show those imperfections.
Well, I think it goes back to the original premise, which is it's all about trust. It's about how do you get people to trust you? And I can even speak, and as I was reading it, I was trying to think in my own world and my own examples. And one of them is I like people who just tell it as it is. Like I tend to gravitate to somebody who is, talks around a topic or never gives me a yes, no, annoy me personally to no end. So, as you talked about it in the book, I'm like, yes, companies that just tell you how it is. And sometimes they're telling you stuff you don't even want to hear, meaning that wasn't really the answer you're looking for, but it's better than finding out it wasn't the answer later on. So I think that that elimination of jargon builds trust, at least for your people who are straightforward and looking for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So no, this has been great. So part of my show is I always ask 3 rapid questions. So I'm going to ask you 3
we're
questions.
In the rapid fire
Get
zone.
rid of rapid fire. Answer with the first thing that pops in mind.
Okay.
And the first thing I always ask is, what are you passionate about personally? What are you passionate about? What do you love more than anything? And again, we can't use family and all that. That we all know that.
yeah. No, not my kids.
Yeah, we get that. Yeah. That's not that answer.
I'm really passionate about comedy. I love watching and studying and following, and I grew up. Oh, this is rapid fire. Yeah, comedy. I like comedy.
Good, but I was gonna, because now you led me to, this wasn't usually my second question, but now, who is your favorite comic and why?
It changes every day as new people come out with different
stuff. So I was
stuff.
trying to think myself, but
I mean, there's legendary comics for, it's kind of like, who's your favorite band? Like, well, I don't know, heavy metal has some, and country. Right now, we're kind of really digging a guy named Nate Bargatze, who's kind of from Nashville originally. I think Bo Burnham has probably inspired me than most other comics, because he's just completely innovated the approach. So Bo Burnham and Nate Bargatze right now.
I love it. Mine's Sam Kinison, by the way, in case you
were. Totally. Yeah.
Who doesn't love Sam Kinison and his feeding the children in the sand? But round up. And the last question is, how do you want to be remembered?
I think I'd want to be remembered as a people first leader, that business and results were a byproduct of being a good person.
That's a good way to be remembered. Ladies and gentlemen, Ron Tite.
Do you know something that I don't know? Like, is it imminent that I'm going to be like?
Is it going to be remembered? This actually, I get that pause every time I ask that question. Everyone's like, "Why do you want to know? is there something you know I do not?"
Honey, update the wills.
But at least now we know how you want to be.
Yeah, that's right.
But Ron, thank you so much for being on the show. You're very enlightening. I certainly would recommend that everyone read your book. I thought it was fantastic. I don't know if I mentioned it at the beginning, like not only was I recommended the book, I actually sent it out to all my executive team. They're all reading it because it really hits home, that authenticity, that getting rid of jargon, that's standing out, is doing and standing for something that's not just a profit and not just, thinking about it, doing it, making it part of your brand, and then telling your story in a compelling way. Like it's just, this whole show can be summed up in just what you said there. Now, you also mentioned that you have another book coming out soon. Maybe give us a little insight into that, so we all in anticipation when that comes out.
Yeah, thank you. It's and the working title, I'm not sure whether it will be that when the time comes to press, but is Now What? And it's kind of prioritizing personal and organizational growth in this period of instability, whether you're talking, hyperinflation or high interest rates or geopolitical crises or the next and looming environmental disaster. What's it going to be? Who knows? And how do you kind of reinvent and kind of invest in personal growth so that your teams and organizations grow?
Love it. Can't wait. I'll be your first buyer, or at least one of them for that new book. Again, Ron, thank you so much for coming on the show. I know that we've all learned a lot from you, and certainly I would recommend also everyone follow your podcast. It's excellent. So thank you so much. And we'll look forward to the next episode. So cheers.
Amazing. Thanks for having me, and thanks to everybody for listening.
Thanks for joining me on Turning the Page. What did you learn from today's episode? If you follow me on LinkedIn, please drop me a comment there. I'd love to chat with you about it over virtual coffee. Send me a message on LinkedIn, or you can do so at our website. The link's in the show notes. I'm Chris Reynolds, and until next time.